The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under thousands of crystal chandeliers as distinguished guests from around the world gathered for the most important royal banquet of the year. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood gracefully near the ornate golden doors, her emerald silk gown catching the light as she welcomed ambassadors, dignitaries, and heads of state with her characteristic warm smile. The evening had begun perfectly. Kate had spent hours preparing for this moment, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized by the press and remembered by history. Her stylist had carefully chosen the stunning dress, which complemented her sapphire and diamond tiara, a piece that once belonged to Princess Diana. The weight of both the jewelry and the responsibility felt heavier than usual tonight. William stood across the room, engaged in animated conversation with the French president, but his eyes frequently found Kate in the crowd. He noticed how she occasionally touched her temple, a subtle gesture that others might miss but he recognized as a sign she wasn't feeling entirely well. They had been married long enough for him to read these small signals, and tonight something seemed different about his wife. The banquet was particularly significant because it marked the beginning of a new diplomatic initiative that Kate had championed for months. She had worked tirelessly to organize cultural exchanges between Britain and several Commonwealth nations, focusing on educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Tonight's gathering would formally launch this program, and Kate was scheduled to deliver a speech that she had rehearsed countless times. As the evening progressed, Kate moved through the crowd with practiced elegance, switching effortlessly between conversations in English, French, and Spanish. She discussed art exhibitions with the Italian ambassador's wife, shared insights about environmental conservation with a group of Scandinavian ministers, and listened intently as a young activist from New Zealand explained her work with indigenous communities. However, those closest to Kate began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. Lady Susan, one of her ladies-in-waiting, observed that the princess seemed to be gripping her clutch purse tighter than usual. The private secretary noticed that Kate's responses, while still charming and appropriate, were becoming slightly shorter and more measured. The palace staff had outdone themselves with the evening's arrangements. The dining room was set with the finest china and silverware, while the menu featured delicacies from each represented nation. The aroma of roasted lamb, fresh herbs, and delicate pastries filled the air, but Kate found herself feeling slightly nauseous rather than hungry, unusual for someone who typically enjoyed these elaborate royal meals. William finally managed to extract himself from his diplomatic duties and made his way toward his wife. He could see the strain around her eyes despite her brilliant smile. When he reached her side during a brief lull in conversations, he gently placed his hand on the small of her back and whispered, "How are you holding up, darling?" Kate turned to him with a reassuring smile, but William caught a glimpse of something concerning in her expression. "I'm fine," she whispered back, though she leaned slightly into his touch. "Just a bit warm in here with all these people." The ballroom was indeed filled to capacity, with nearly 300 guests creating a buzz of conversation and activity. The evening's schedule was precisely timed, and Kate knew that dinner service would begin shortly. She excused herself from a conversation with the Canadian High Commissioner and walked toward the ladies' powder room, hoping a few moments of quiet might help her feel more centered. The ornate mirror reflected back a face that looked perfectly composed to the outside world, but Kate noticed the slight pallor in her own complexion. She applied a touch more blush and took several deep breaths, reminding herself of the importance of tonight's event. The Children's Education Initiative meant everything to her, and she couldn't let a moment of feeling unwell overshadow months of careful planning and preparation. Kate had always prided herself on her ability to maintain composure under pressure, a skill that had served her well throughout her years in the royal family. Returning to the ballroom, Kate was immediately approached by a documentary filmmaker who was capturing the evening for a special broadcast about modern diplomacy. The cameras followed her as she graciously posed for photos and answered questions about her passion for education reform. She spoke eloquently about the power of learning to transform lives and communities, her voice clear and confident despite the growing unease she felt. The palace orchestra began playing a gentle classical piece, signaling that dinner service was about to commence. Kate took her designated place at the head table, between the Archbishop of Canterbury and the President of Ghana, both of whom were eager to continue their earlier conversations about the role of faith and tradition in modern education systems. As guests began moving toward their assigned seats, Kate felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the edge of the table discreetly, hoping the sensation would pass quickly. The elaborate place setting before her seemed to blur slightly at the edges, and she blinked hard to clear her vision. William, who was seated several chairs away due to protocol requirements, caught her eye across the table. His expression immediately shifted from diplomatic politeness to genuine concern as he recognized the subtle signs of distress that only a devoted husband would notice. Kate managed a small nod to reassure him, but inside she was beginning to worry that something was seriously wrong. The first course was served with great ceremony, but Kate found herself unable to focus on the delicate soup before her. The conversations around her continued to flow, but they seemed to be coming from a great distance. She participated when directly addressed, but her responses required tremendous effort to maintain their usual warmth and intelligence. As the evening progressed toward the moment when she would be called upon to deliver her speech, Kate realized that her condition was worsening rather than improving, setting the stage for an incident that would change everything. The grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace sparkled under thousands of crystal chandeliers as distinguished guests from around the world gathered for the most important royal banquet of the year. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood gracefully near the ornate golden doors, her emerald silk gown catching the light as she welcomed ambassadors, dignitaries, and heads of state with her characteristic warm smile. The evening had begun perfectly. Kate had spent hours preparing for this moment, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized by the press and remembered by history. Her stylist had carefully chosen the stunning dress, which complemented her sapphire and diamond tiara, a piece that once belonged to Princess Diana. The weight of both the jewelry and the responsibility felt heavier than usual tonight. William stood across the room, engaged in animated conversation with the French president, but his eyes frequently found Kate in the crowd. He noticed how she occasionally touched her temple, a subtle gesture that others might miss but he recognized as a sign she wasn't feeling entirely well. They had been married long enough for him to read these small signals, and tonight something seemed different about his wife. The banquet was particularly significant because it marked the beginning of a new diplomatic initiative that Kate had championed for months. She had worked tirelessly to organize cultural exchanges between Britain and several Commonwealth nations, focusing on educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Tonight's gathering would formally launch this program, and Kate was scheduled to deliver a speech that she had rehearsed countless times. As the evening progressed, Kate moved through the crowd with practiced elegance, switching effortlessly between conversations in English, French, and Spanish. She discussed art exhibitions with the Italian ambassador's wife, shared insights about environmental conservation with a group of Scandinavian ministers, and listened intently as a young activist from New Zealand explained her work with indigenous communities. However, those closest to Kate began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. Lady Susan, one of her ladies-in-waiting, observed that the princess seemed to be gripping her clutch purse tighter than usual. The private secretary noticed that Kate's responses, while still charming and appropriate, were becoming slightly shorter and more measured. The palace staff had outdone themselves with the evening's arrangements. The dining room was set with the finest china and silverware, while the menu featured delicacies from each represented nation. The aroma of roasted lamb, fresh herbs, and delicate pastries filled the air, but Kate found herself feeling slightly nauseous rather than hungry, unusual for someone who typically enjoyed these elaborate royal meals. William finally managed to extract himself from his diplomatic duties and made his way toward his wife. He could see the strain around her eyes despite her brilliant smile. When he reached her side during a brief lull in conversations, he gently placed his hand on the small of her back and whispered, "How are you holding up, darling?" Kate turned to him with a reassuring smile, but William caught a glimpse of something concerning in her expression. "I'm fine," she whispered back, though she leaned slightly into his touch. "Just a bit warm in here with all these people." The ballroom was indeed filled to capacity, with nearly 300 guests creating a buzz of conversation and activity. The evening's schedule was precisely timed, and Kate knew that dinner service would begin shortly. She excused herself from a conversation with the Canadian High Commissioner and walked toward the ladies' powder room, hoping a few moments of quiet might help her feel more centered. The ornate mirror reflected back a face that looked perfectly composed to the outside world. But Kate noticed the slight pallor in her own complexion. She applied a touch more blush and took several deep breaths, reminding herself of the importance of tonight's event. The Children's Education Initiative meant everything to her, and she couldn't let a moment of feeling unwell overshadow months of careful planning and preparation. Kate had always prided herself on her ability to maintain composure under pressure, a skill that had served her well throughout her years in the royal family. Returning to the ballroom, Kate was immediately approached by a documentary filmmaker who was capturing the evening for a special broadcast about modern diplomacy. The cameras followed her as she graciously posed for photos and answered questions about her passion for education reform. She spoke eloquently about the power of learning to transform lives and communities, her voice clear and confident despite the growing unease she felt. The palace orchestra began playing a gentle classical piece, signaling that dinner service was about to commence. Kate took her designated place at the head table, between the Archbishop of Canterbury and the President of Ghana, both of whom were eager to continue their earlier conversations about the role of faith and tradition in modern education systems. As guests began moving toward their assigned seats, Kate felt a sudden wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the edge of the table discreetly, hoping the sensation would pass quickly. The elaborate place setting before her seemed to blur slightly at the edges, and she blinked hard to clear her vision. William, who was seated several chairs away due to protocol requirements, caught her eye across the table. His expression immediately shifted from diplomatic politeness to genuine concern as he recognized the subtle signs of distress that only a devoted husband would notice. Kate managed a small nod to reassure him, but inside she was beginning to worry that something was seriously wrong. The first course was served with great ceremony, but Kate found herself unable to focus on the delicate soup before her. The conversations around her continued to flow, but they seemed to be coming from a great distance. She participated when directly addressed, but her responses required tremendous effort to maintain their usual warmth and intelligence. As the evening progressed toward the moment when she would be called upon to deliver her speech, Kate realized that her condition was worsening rather than improving, setting the stage for an incident that would change everything. The magnificent main course was presented with theatrical precision, as palace servers moved in perfect synchronization around the grand dining room. Each plate featured herb-crusted lamb accompanied by seasonal vegetables arranged in an artistic display that reflected the international nature of the gathering. The presentation was stunning, but Kate found herself unable to appreciate the culinary artistry as her physical discomfort reached alarming levels. She attempted to cut a small piece of the lamb, hoping that eating something substantial might help stabilize whatever was happening to her body. The first bite tasted like sawdust in her mouth, and she had to concentrate intensely to swallow it without showing any signs of distress. The effort required to maintain her composure was becoming exhausting, and she could feel her energy reserves depleting rapidly. The conversation at the head table had turned to infrastructure development in remote areas, with the President of Ghana sharing inspiring stories about communities that had built schools with minimal resources, but maximum determination. Kate genuinely wanted to engage with this topic that was so close to her heart, but found herself struggling to follow the thread of conversation as her concentration wavered. The determination of these children to learn despite obstacles is truly remarkable. Kate managed to contribute, drawing on her deep knowledge of the subject even as her physical state deteriorated. Education has the power to break cycles of poverty that have persisted for generations. Her voice remained clear and passionate, though speaking required tremendous effort. William was now openly watching his wife from across the table, no longer bothering to hide his concern behind diplomatic pleasantries. He could see that she was fighting a losing battle against whatever was affecting her, and every muscle in his body was tensed to spring into action if needed. The other guests remained oblivious to the drama unfolding, absorbed in their own conversations and the excellent meal. Lady Susan had positioned herself at a table with a clear view of the head table, and she too was growing increasingly worried about Kate's condition. As someone who had accompanied the princess on countless engagements, she could read the subtle signs that indicated serious distress. She discreetly reached for her phone, preparing to signal the palace medical team if necessary. The dining room was filled with the pleasant sounds of conversation, clinking crystal and soft classical music, but Kate felt increasingly disconnected from the festive atmosphere. The chandelier lights seemed too bright, creating halos around objects that made it difficult to focus. She blinked repeatedly, trying to clear her vision. But the disorientation was getting worse rather than better. The Archbishop of Canterbury, with his decades of experience in reading people's emotional and physical states, leaned closer to Kate with grandfatherly concern. "My dear, you look quite unwell," he said in a voice so quiet that only she could hear. "Perhaps we should arrange for you to have a brief respite before your speech." Kate appreciated his kindness but felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. "This evening is too important," she whispered back. "So many people have worked hard to make this initiative possible. I can't let them down." Her dedication was admirable, but the Archbishop could see that her determination might be endangering her health. The palace photographer continued to move around the room, capturing the important moments of international diplomacy for posterity. When he focused his lens on Kate, she automatically straightened her posture and produced a radiant smile. But the effort was becoming more difficult with each passing moment. The photographs would later show no hint of her struggle, testament to her years of training in maintaining perfect public composure. As guests progressed through the main course, the Master of Ceremonies began preparing for the speech portion of the evening. Kate's address was scheduled to begin in just 20 minutes, and she could see staff members setting up the podium with microphones and adjusting the lighting for optimal television coverage. The reality of having to stand and deliver a complex speech in her current condition was becoming overwhelming. The wine service continued around the table, with sommeliers offering perfect pairings for each course. Kate declined the wine, asking instead for more water, which she sipped carefully while trying to steady her increasingly rapid heartbeat. The simple act of drinking required concentration, as her hands had developed a slight tremor that she hoped others wouldn't notice. William made a decision that protocol would normally forbid. He stood from his assigned seat and walked around the table to the head table, approaching under the pretense of greeting the foreign dignitaries seated near his wife. However, his real purpose was to position himself closer to Kate, ready to respond immediately if her condition worsened. "Your Royal Highness," the President of Ghana said as William approached, "your wife has been sharing fascinating insights about sustainable education models. Her passion for this work is truly inspiring." William smiled and nodded, but his attention was focused entirely on Kate's increasingly pale complexion and the way she was gripping her water glass. Kate looked up at William as he positioned himself behind her chair, and their eyes met in a moment of silent communication that spoke volumes about their deep connection. She tried to convey that she was managing the situation, but he could see the genuine distress behind her brave facade. His presence beside her provided some comfort, but they both knew that the most challenging part of the evening was still ahead. The dinner service was nearing its conclusion, and staff members began clearing plates while preparing for the dessert course. Kate had barely touched her food, managing only a few bites to maintain appearances. The untouched meal would later prompt questions from observant staff members, but for now, everyone remained focused on the diplomatic success of the gathering. As the evening progressed toward the crucial moment when Kate would need to stand and address the assembled dignitaries, she realized that her condition was beyond what willpower alone could overcome, setting the stage for a crisis that would test both her resolve and William's protective instincts. The dessert course arrived with spectacular presentation, featuring individual chocolate soufflés that had been timed to perfection in the palace kitchens. Each delicate creation was accompanied by gold leaf and fresh berries, representing the finest of British culinary artistry. The sweet aroma that normally would have been delightful now made Kate feel even more nauseous, and she pressed her lips together to fight back the overwhelming sensation. William had positioned himself strategically behind Kate's chair, close enough to provide support while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation with nearby guests. He could feel the tension radiating from her shoulders, and noticed how she had begun to lean slightly forward, as if trying to steady herself against an invisible force that was pulling her off balance. The Master of Ceremonies approached the podium and began testing the microphone, creating soft feedback that echoed through the grand dining room. This was the final signal that Kate's speech would begin shortly, and she felt a surge of panic as she realized that standing up and walking to the podium might be beyond her current capabilities. The room seemed to sway slightly even though she was sitting still. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "we will now pause for a brief moment before our keynote address. Please enjoy the dessert course while we prepare for Her Royal Highness to present the Children's Education Initiative." The polite applause that followed sounded distant and muffled to Kate's ears. The president of Ghana turned to Kate with excitement, unaware of her deteriorating condition. "Your Royal Highness, I am very much looking forward to your speech. The work you've done to bring these nations together for this cause is remarkable." Kate managed to smile and nod, but speaking required enormous effort as her throat felt tight and her breathing had become shallow. Lady Susan had grown increasingly concerned and had discreetly positioned herself near the head table, ready to assist if needed. She caught William's eye and saw her own worry reflected in his expression. Years of working with the royal family had taught her to read crisis situations, and every instinct told her that they were approaching a serious medical emergency. The documentary crew adjusted their cameras to capture Kate's upcoming speech, and the television lighting technicians made final adjustments to ensure optimal coverage. The weight of knowing that millions of people would eventually see this broadcast added to the pressure Kate was feeling. Though she tried to push such thoughts aside and focus on her breathing, Kate attempted to take a sip of water to calm her nerves, but her hand was trembling so noticeably that she had to use both hands to steady the glass. The Archbishop of Canterbury observed this with growing alarm and leaned closer to her. "My dear child," he whispered urgently, "I really think you need medical attention. This is beyond normal nervousness." "I have to do this," Kate whispered back, her voice barely audible. "Too many people are counting on this program to succeed. The children in these communities deserve better educational opportunities." Her commitment to the cause was admirable, but her physical state was becoming dangerous, and everyone close to her could see it. William made a decision that would later be remembered as one of the most protective gestures in recent royal history. He moved from behind Kate's chair to beside her, kneeling down so that he could speak directly into her ear without the assembled guests overhearing their conversation. "Kate, you're scaring me," he said with quiet intensity. "We need to get you to a doctor right now." The intimate moment between the royal couple did not go unnoticed by the nearby guests, though most assumed it was simply a sweet exchange between husband and wife before an important speech. The cameras captured the tender scene, though they had no idea they were documenting the prelude to a medical crisis that would unfold within minutes. Kate looked into William's eyes and saw the depth of his concern, which finally helped her realize how serious her condition had become. "I feel like the room is spinning," she admitted in a whisper so quiet that only he could hear. "And I'm having trouble seeing clearly. Everything seems to have halos around it." The admission frightened her because it meant acknowledging that something was seriously wrong. The palace physician, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, was always present during major royal events, positioned discreetly in a side room where she could respond quickly if needed. Lady Susan had already sent a discreet message to alert her that the princess might require medical attention, and Dr. Mitchell was now stationed just outside the dining room, ready to respond immediately. As the final preparations for Kate's speech were completed, she attempted to stand from her chair for what she thought would be a brief moment to test her stability. The movement caused an immediate rush of dizziness that was far more severe than anything she had experienced earlier in the evening. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles turning white from the effort. William immediately stood beside her, placing a supportive hand on her back while maintaining a casual appearance for the benefit of the observing guests and cameras. "Sit back down," he urged quietly. "We're calling this off right now." His protective instincts had taken over completely, and he was prepared to create whatever diplomatic incident necessary to ensure his wife's safety. Kate tried to straighten up and prove that she could handle the situation, but as she lifted her head and looked toward the podium where she was supposed to deliver her speech, the entire room began to tilt and spin violently. The faces of the assembled dignitaries blurred together, and the chandelier lights created streaking patterns across her vision that made it impossible to focus on anything. "William," she whispered urgently, reaching for his hand as she felt her legs beginning to give way beneath her. The carefully maintained composure that had carried her through years of royal duties was finally cracking under the strain of whatever medical crisis was overwhelming her body. She could feel herself losing the battle to remain conscious, and the realization terrified her. The moment had arrived when Kate's determination and sense of duty would finally be overwhelmed by the physical reality of her condition, setting the stage for the dramatic collapse that would change the entire evening and demonstrate the depth of William's love and protective instincts. The moment Kate whispered William's name with such urgency, he knew that the situation had moved beyond manageable. Her face had gone completely pale, and he could see that she was fighting to remain conscious. Without hesitation, he positioned himself directly beside her chair, ready to catch her if she collapsed. His years of military training had taught him to respond quickly to emergencies, and every instinct told him that they were seconds away from a medical crisis. Kate tried one more time to prove to herself and everyone around her that she could handle the situation. She placed both hands firmly on the table and attempted to push herself up to a standing position, determined to make it to the podium and deliver the speech that meant so much to her. For a brief moment, she managed to rise partially from her chair, and hope flickered that she might overcome whatever was affecting her. But as soon as she reached a semi-standing position, the room around her began to spin violently, as if she were caught in the center of a tornado. The faces of the distinguished guests blurred into an indistinguishable swirl of colors, and the sound of conversations became a distant roar that seemed to come from underwater. The elegant dining room that had been so familiar and comfortable just moments before now felt like an alien landscape where nothing made sense. "I can't," Kate began to say, but the words died in her throat as she felt her knees buckle beneath her. The strength that had carried her through countless royal engagements and public appearances simply evaporated, leaving her unable to support her own weight. She reached desperately for something to steady herself, but her coordination was too compromised to find purchase on anything stable. William saw the exact moment when consciousness began to leave his wife's eyes. Without a second's hesitation, he lunged forward, wrapping his arms around her just as her body began to fall. The movement was so swift and instinctive that he barely had time to think. His only focus was preventing Kate from hitting the floor or injuring herself in the fall. The collapse happened so quickly that most of the guests didn't immediately realize what was occurring. Those seated at nearby tables might have noticed some commotion at the head table, but the full drama was initially visible only to those in the immediate vicinity. The cameras, which had been focused on the podium in preparation for Kate's speech, missed the initial moments of the crisis. "Kate, Kate, can you hear me?" William called urgently as he caught her limp form against his chest. Her head lolled back and her eyes had rolled upward, showing only the whites. The sight terrified him more than anything he had ever experienced in his life, including his military service in dangerous situations around the world. This was his beloved wife, the mother of his children, and she was completely unconscious in his arms. Lady Susan was the first person to reach them, having moved swiftly from her nearby table the moment she saw Kate beginning to collapse. "I've already called Dr. Mitchell," she said efficiently while helping William support Kate's unconscious form. "She's just outside the dining room and will be here in seconds." Her calm professionalism masked the deep concern she felt for the princess. She had served and protected for years. The Archbishop of Canterbury immediately stood and moved to shield the scene from the view of other guests, instinctively understanding that the royal family's privacy needed protection during this vulnerable moment. His tall frame and flowing robes helped create a visual barrier, while William and Lady Susan focused on caring for Kate. Dr. Mitchell burst through the dining room doors within moments, carrying her medical bag and moving with the urgent efficiency of someone trained to handle royal medical emergencies. She had been hoping that her services wouldn't be needed tonight, but Kate's earlier symptoms had prepared her for this possibility. "Lay her down on the floor," she instructed William immediately. "We need to get blood flow to her brain." William gently lowered Kate to the ornate carpet beside her chair, cradling her head in his lap while Dr. Mitchell began her examination. Kate's breathing was shallow but steady, and her pulse was rapid but regular, signs that suggested a fainting episode rather than something more serious like a heart attack or stroke. The relief William felt at this initial assessment was overwhelming. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Mitchell said to William while checking Kate's vital signs, "this appears to be a vasovagal syncope, essentially a fainting spell likely caused by stress, dehydration, or low blood sugar. Her vital signs are stable, which is very encouraging." The medical terminology meant little to William at that moment. All he cared about was that Kate would be okay. By this time, word of the incident had begun to spread quietly through the dining room. The master of ceremonies, demonstrating remarkable presence of mind, approached the microphone and made a brief announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief delay in our program. Please continue to enjoy the evening while we address a minor technical issue." Kate's eyelids began to flutter slightly, the first sign that consciousness was returning. William immediately leaned closer to her face, speaking in the gentle, loving tone he used with their children when they were frightened or hurt. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm right here with you. You're safe." His voice was steady and reassuring, though inside he was still shaken by how quickly she had collapsed. "William?" Kate's voice was barely a whisper as her eyes slowly opened and tried to focus on his face. The confusion in her expression was heartbreaking, as she struggled to understand what had happened and why she was lying on the floor surrounded by concerned faces. "What? Why am I—" She tried to sit up immediately, but Dr. Mitchell gently pressed her shoulder back down. "You fainted during the banquet," William explained softly, stroking her hair away from her face. "But you're going to be fine. Dr. Mitchell is here, and she says your vital signs are good." The relief in his voice was evident to everyone nearby, though he was still concerned about what had caused such a dramatic collapse. The intimate scene of William caring for his unconscious wife had revealed the depth of their bond in a way that no formal royal appearance ever could, setting the stage for a recovery that would be as closely watched as the collapse itself. As Kate's consciousness gradually returned, the first thing she became aware of was William's gentle voice and the feeling of his hand stroking her hair. The ornate ceiling of the Buckingham Palace dining room came into focus above her, decorated with intricate plasterwork that she had admired countless times, but never from this particular angle. The realization that she was lying on the floor during one of the most important diplomatic events of the year filled her with immediate embarrassment and concern. "I need to get up," Kate whispered urgently, attempting once again to sit up, despite Dr. Mitchell's gentle restraining hand on her shoulder. "The speech. Everyone is waiting for the speech about the education initiative." Even in her weakened state, her first thoughts were about her responsibilities and the people who were counting on her to deliver the important address about children's educational opportunities. "The speech can wait," William said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who would not be argued with on this particular matter. "Right now, the only thing that matters is making sure you're okay." His protective instincts had taken complete control, and he was prepared to cancel the entire evening if necessary to ensure his wife's well-being. Dr. Mitchell continued her examination, while speaking in calm, professional tones. "Your Royal Highness, I want to check a few more things before we consider moving you. Can you tell me if you remember feeling unwell before you collapsed?" She was gathering information to understand what had triggered the fainting episode and to rule out any more serious underlying conditions. Kate tried to organize her thoughts, which still felt somewhat scattered. "I had been feeling dizzy and nauseous for most of the evening," she admitted reluctantly, "and the room seemed too warm, even though I know the temperature was fine. I kept thinking I could push through it because tonight was so important." Her honesty revealed just how much she had been suffering in silence while maintaining her public composure. Lady Susan had been efficiently managing the situation from a logistical standpoint, quietly coordinating with palace staff to ensure that the dining room remained calm, and that the incident was handled with appropriate discretion. She now knelt beside Kate with a cool, damp cloth that she gently placed on the princess's forehead. "This should help you feel a bit better," she said with maternal concern. The Archbishop of Canterbury continued to provide a discreet barrier of privacy, engaging nearby guests in quiet conversation to prevent them from crowding around the scene. His decades of experience in managing sensitive situations within the royal family served him well as he balanced genuine concern for Kate with the need to maintain dignity and protocol during a public event. William helped Kate sit up slowly, supporting her back with his arm, while Dr. Mitchell monitored her response to the change in position. "How do you feel now?" he asked, searching her face for any signs that she might be about to faint again. The color was gradually returning to her cheeks, which was encouraging, but he remained vigilant for any indication that her condition might worsen. "Better," Kate said honestly, though her voice was still weak. "The dizziness seems to be fading, and I don't feel as nauseous as I did before." She looked around at the small group of people who had rushed to her aid and felt overwhelming gratitude for their quick response and genuine care. "I'm so sorry for causing such a disruption during such an important evening." Dr. Mitchell completed her preliminary examination and sat back on her heels with a reassuring expression. "Based on what I'm seeing, this appears to be a classic case of vasovagal syncope, a fainting spell triggered by stress, fatigue, and possibly dehydration. Your vital signs are stable, and you're responding well to treatment. However, I do recommend that we move you somewhere more private for a more thorough evaluation." The suggestion of leaving the dining room prompted immediate concern from Kate about the impact on the evening's diplomatic proceedings. But what about the Education Initiative presentation? All of these dignitaries have traveled so far to be here, and the children's programs depend on the funding commitments we were supposed to secure tonight. Her dedication to the cause remained unwavering despite her physical collapse. William looked at his wife with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Kate, you just fainted in front of 300 people. The Education Initiative will survive if we postpone your speech. The children of the world will understand that their advocate needed to take care of her own health for one evening." His words were gentle but firm, reflecting his determination to prioritize her well-being over protocol. The master of ceremonies approached their small group with discreet professionalism, bending down to speak quietly with William. "Your Royal Highness, how would you like me to address the situation with our guests? I can make any announcement you feel is appropriate, or we can proceed with alternative arrangements for the evening's program." Lady Susan had already been thinking ahead to practical solutions. "Perhaps we could have someone else deliver the princess's speech on her behalf," she suggested. The written remarks could be read by another member of the royal family or a senior government official. The content is what's truly important for launching the initiative. Kate's eyes lit up at this possibility, seeing it as a way to salvage the evening's crucial objectives without requiring her to stand and speak, when she was clearly not well enough to do so safely. "William, you know the program as well as I do," she said hopefully. "You could deliver the address and explain that I'm not feeling well but remain completely committed to the children's education cause." The suggestion made perfect sense from both a practical and personal standpoint. William had been intimately involved in developing the Education Initiative and was fully prepared to speak about its importance. More importantly, it would allow Kate to receive proper medical attention, while ensuring that the diplomatic and charitable objectives of the evening could still be achieved, as they worked together to find a solution that would protect both Kate's health and the success of the Education Initiative. It became clear that the crisis had actually revealed the strength of their partnership and their shared commitment to causes greater than themselves. William helped Kate to her feet slowly and carefully, keeping his arm securely around her waist as she tested her stability. Her legs felt shaky but functional, and though she still felt weak, the terrifying dizziness that had preceded her collapse seemed to have subsided significantly. Dr. Mitchell remained close by, ready to provide support if Kate showed any signs of fainting again. "I think the fresh air and some quiet time will do you a world of good," Dr. Mitchell said as she packed her medical equipment. "But I do want to conduct a more thorough examination once we get you settled somewhere private. Sometimes these episodes can indicate underlying issues that need attention, and we should rule out any serious causes." Lady Susan had already arranged for Kate's private sitting room to be prepared as a temporary recovery area, complete with comfortable seating, additional medical supplies, and refreshments that might help restore her energy levels. The efficiency with which the palace staff had responded to the crisis demonstrated their years of experience in handling unexpected situations during royal events. As they prepared to leave the dining room, Kate paused to look back at the assembled guests who were still enjoying their dessert and conversation, largely unaware of the medical drama that had just unfolded. The sight of the successful diplomatic gathering filled her with both satisfaction and regret. Satisfaction that the evening was proceeding well despite her collapse, and regret that she wouldn't be able to personally deliver the speech she had worked so hard to prepare. "Are you sure you can handle the presentation?" Kate asked William one more time, her voice still soft but filled with determination to see the Education Initiative launched successfully. The section about sustainable funding models is particularly complex, and the statistics about literacy rates in remote communities need to be presented carefully to maintain diplomatic sensitivity. William smiled at his wife's continued focus on the details of the presentation, even as she recovered from a medical emergency. "I've been listening to you practice that speech for weeks," he reminded her gently. "I could probably recite it word for word at this point. And if I miss anything important, I'll simply tell our guest that the brilliant architect of this program will provide additional details once she's feeling better." The master of ceremonies had remained nearby, ready to implement whatever solution the royal couple decided upon. When William nodded to indicate that he would indeed deliver Kate's speech, the experienced staff member immediately began making the necessary adjustments to the evening's program. The podium microphone was tested again, and the lighting technicians prepared for a different speaker than originally planned. Dr. Mitchell accompanied Kate and William as they made their way toward the exit, moving slowly to accommodate Kate's still fragile condition. The Archbishop of Canterbury offered a blessing for Kate's swift recovery, while Lady Susan coordinated with security to ensure their departure from the dining room was handled discreetly and efficiently. As they reached the doorway, Kate turned back toward the head table where she had been sitting just minutes before. The president of Ghana caught her eye and raised his water glass in a small, supportive salute that conveyed his wishes for her recovery and his continued enthusiasm for the education initiative. The gesture touched Kate deeply and reinforced her belief that the important work would continue regardless of her temporary absence. "Thank you," she mouthed silently, to the small group of people who had rallied around her during the crisis. Feeling overwhelming gratitude for their quick response and genuine care, the incident had revealed not just her own vulnerability, but also the strength of the support system that surrounded the royal family during both public and private challenges. William delivered Kate's speech with passion and eloquence, explaining to the assembled dignitaries that his wife remained completely committed to the Children's Education Initiative, despite being unable to present it herself due to feeling unwell. His heartfelt delivery, combined with his obvious love and concern for Kate, actually enhanced the emotional impact of the presentation and generated even stronger support for the charitable cause than originally anticipated. The Education Initiative was officially launched that evening to enthusiastic support from all participating nations, with funding commitments exceeding Kate's most optimistic projections. The irony was not lost on anyone that Kate's collapse, which she had feared would derail the program, had actually strengthened it by demonstrating the depth of commitment that both she and William had to improving children's lives around the world. In the quiet of her private sitting room, as Kate recovered under Dr. Mitchell's care while listening to the applause that followed William's successful presentation, she realized that the evening had taught her important lessons about accepting help, trusting others to carry on important work, and recognizing that even the strongest people sometimes need support. The fainting incident that had terrified her became a testament to the power of love, partnership, and shared dedication to causes greater than oneself. The following day, newspapers around the world would report on both Kate's medical episode and the overwhelming success of the Children's Education Initiative, but those closest to the royal couple would remember the evening primarily as a demonstration of William's protective love and Kate's unwavering commitment to making the world a better place for children, even when her own health was compromised.